You know, usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this underlying expectation of absolute precision.
Right. It's supposed to be highly objective.
Exactly. It's almost like engineering. Like you break your arm, the X-ray shows that jagged white line against the black background, and the doctor just points at it with a pen and says, "There it is. That's the fracture." It's undeniable.
Yeah, it's binary.
Yeah.
I mean, it's either broken or it's not.
Right. It's clean. Visually, it's totally unambiguous.
And, well, psychologically speaking, that's deeply comforting for us. We, as human beings, like things to be visible. We like complex problems to be neatly categorized into, you know, healthy or sick or functioning or broken.
But then, and this is where it gets messy, you step out of the hospital and into the world of national development, you try to look at macroeconomic structural transformation, and suddenly that pristine X-ray machine is just completely broken.
Oh, absolutely. It's the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
Right, because we're looking at the diagnostic landscape of an entire country. Millions of moving parts, thousands of overlapping policies, and the picture is, well, honestly, it's incredibly murky most of the time.
Yeah, usually when we attempt to look at how a nation grows or, why it fails to grow, we are wading through this dense swamp of contradictory indicators.
Highly volatile markets, right?
Exactly, and policy failures that take a decade to fully manifest. You might have, say, GDP going up, but inequality is simultaneously skyrocketing. Or you might have great education metrics, but massive brain drain. It is rarely a clear picture.
Exactly. But then, and this is why I'm so excited today, you, our listener, brought us this incredible stack of sources. You handed us this slide deck. And I have to say, looking at slide 1 right now, I genuinely felt like I was looking at that perfect, elusive macroeconomic X-ray.
It is a breathtakingly precise document, and I don't use that word lightly.
It really is. It's titled Luxembourg Socioeconomic and Sustainable Development Comprehensive Assessment Report. And the subtitle sets the stage beautifully. Structural Transformation and Governance Analysis from a Macro Data Perspective.
The methodology here is just so rigorous.
Yeah, and for you listening, I just want to take a moment to paint a visual picture of this first slide you gave us. Because, honestly, the design choices alone tell a story.
They do. It's very intentional.
Right. Like, there are no flashy stock photos of people shaking hands in a glass boardroom. There are no dramatic, sweeping cityscapes of a financial district at sunset.
And no visual fluff at all.
Exactly. It is a pure white background, minimalist academic typography. And on the left side, there's this low saturation gray infographic shading used to build up the background texture.
Which is completely flat, by the way.
Yes, absolutely no 3D effects or drop shadows, none of those concrete colors or saturated images, just pure concentrated data. It sets a very specific tone, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The visual language of that slide announces right away that we are not here for a marketing pitch.
Right.
This isn't a tourism board brochure trying to, sell us on a vacation. We are here for the strict anatomy of a nation. We're looking at an autopsy of macroeconomic success.
Autopsy of success. I love that. So the mission of our deep dive today is to unpack exactly how a tiny, landlocked European nation, a place with a population smaller than like many mid-sized American cities, somehow fundamentally hacked the global economy.
Hacked is a good word for it, yeah.
Because they did. How did they achieve unprecedented, almost science fiction levels of wealth? And more importantly, as we'll see later in the deck you provided, we need to ask whether this perfectly optimized society can actually survive its own biology.
Which is the ultimate creeping twist in this entire narrative. It's a fascinating paradox.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Moving our attention to slide 2, the executive summary. You've laid out this beautiful, flat, 4-quadrant infographic. It utilizes these deep gray and low saturation gray-blue tones. And the 4 quadrants perfectly divide the societal architecture into economy, society, environment, and governance.
It's a highly elegant logical framework, really.
Yeah.
And it's essential for understanding the rest of the data.
How so?
Well, what this summary slide is telling us right out of the gate is that you cannot look at economic wealth in a vacuum.
Yeah.
The core logic presented here is that Luxembourg relied on an incredibly high proportion of service industries and international trade to achieve a long-term structural leap in per capita output.
Which is the economy quadrant.
Exactly. But if they just had the money, they'd just be a rich anomaly.
Right. And the data preview you've given us here is just staggering. I mean, we are talking about a GDP per capita breaking the 100,000 mark in local currency.
Yeah, which is astronomical.
And we are looking at child mortality plummeting to 2.3 per 1,000 live births. And there is an export ratio metric here that frankly looks like a typo at first glance.
Because it seems to defy the traditional physics of how a domestic economy works, right?
Exactly. But as the other three quadrants clearly show, that seemingly impossible wealth is then systematically converted into world-class healthcare, near-perfect educational retention, and globally dominant governance metrics.
All while simultaneously navigating a complete environmental energy transition away from coal. It presents a closed-loop system of human flourishing.
But before we can look at how Luxembourg spends its money to engineer that flourishing, we have to deeply understand how they make it in the first place.
Right. The engine underneath it all.
Because the wealth generation here isn't just successful, it's anomalous. So let's transition our focus into the specific mechanics of this wealth. Because yeah, you can't build a utopia without a massive humming engine. Look at slide 3 that you shared with us.
The macroeconomic timeline. This is where the structural transformation becomes visible.
Yes, it's a low saturation blue 2D line chart, and it meticulously tracks GDP per capita in constant local currency units. We start way back in the historical data, and the baseline is hovering around 27,077, which, let's be clear, for post-war Europe is a perfectly respectable, solid foundation.
Absolutely. It's a healthy baseline.
But then the line just starts climbing. And
Right.
climbing. It never really plateaus in a meaningful way until it hits this astronomical peak of over 104,442.
Yeah.
And you've annotated this chart perfectly for us. There's this flat red dashed circle drawn right around the historical highs in the later years.
Right.
And it has a straight gray arrow pointing to a text box that reads, "Real wealth per capita more than tripled, demonstrating strong economic resilience."
What's fascinating here, and what is absolutely critical for anyone looking at global economics to understand, is the distinction we have to make between GDP, which is gross domestic product, and GNI, gross national income.
Okay, lay that out for us, because the chart tracks GDP.
It tracks GDP, but
Like-
the underlying reality is more complex. You see, in the vast majority of countries, those two lines, GDP and GNI, they hug each other pretty closely.
Yeah.
They move in tandem. GDP measures the total value of everything produced inside the physical borders of the country. GNI measures the total income actually earned by the country's residents, regardless of where in the world that production happens.
Right, okay, let me make sure I have this straight. So if I own a factory and it's physically sitting in my country, its output contributes to GDP.
Correct.
But if my citizens own a factory right across the border in a neighboring country and they bring those profits back home, that money hits the GNI.
Exactly. You've got the textbook definition. Now, in the case of Luxembourg, this standard economic relationship is warped in a highly unique, almost singular way.
How so?
Luxembourg relies on a massive daily influx of cross-border workers. Every single day as the sun comes up, hundreds of thousands of people commute from France, from Belgium, from Germany, straight into Luxembourg to work their jobs.
Wow.
And then when the day is done, they drive home across the border.
They're literally importing their workforce every morning and exporting them every evening. That is wild to think about logistically.
Precisely. So think about the economic footprint of that daily migration. These cross-border workers are sitting at desks, making trades, writing code, and producing immense economic value physically inside Luxembourg's borders.
Oh, I see. So that drives the GDP number up.
Exactly. That drives the metric on our blue line chart to the stratosphere.
Yeah.
But because those workers take their paychecks, pay their local property taxes, and spend a good portion of their disposable income back home in France or Germany.
The GNI is lower.
Right. The income that actually stays with the permanent residents of Luxembourg is distinctly lower than that massive GDP figure.
It's almost like a massive corporate campus masquerading as a sovereign country. You know, looking at this trajectory, I keep thinking of an analogy.
Oh,
It's like looking at the internal financial chart of a wildly successful Silicon Valley tech startup. You know the story. They hit product market fit, the line suddenly goes exponential, the valuation explodes, and everyone is rich.
a very familiar narrative. Yeah.
But the thing about startups is they eventually crash, or they plateau, or the founders cash out and the innovation dies. Luxembourg is like a startup that somehow achieved that exponential hockey stick growth and then just maintained it for 50 years without ever suffering a fatal crash.
But how did they maintain that product market fit, to lean into your startup analogy? A national economy can't just sell software.
Right.
That brings us to the structural composition shown on slide 4. The industrial structure. This is how they built the engine.
Oh, this slide. I have to admit, when I first looked at the deck you sent over, this was the jaw dropper for me.
It is quite striking.
Visually, it's a very clean white background featuring a 2D percentage stacked bar chart. It uses a stark gray and blue contrast to separate the sectors. And the specific data point you highlighted with an annotation, I literally had to read it 3 times to ensure I wasn't misinterpreting the axis.
You're talking about the female employment figure.
Yes. Female employment in the service sector. It has historically hovered quite high, usually above 90%. But in the most recent years recorded here, it hits 97.1%.
Yeah, 97.1%.
And you drew this very deliberate downward pointing arrow right at the top of the service sector block labeled "Services become the absolute dominant sector." And right next to it, a rectangular box specifically highlighting that 97.1% figure for women.
It is a stunning visual representation of a completed economic pivot.
It really is.
Meanwhile, if you cast your eyes down to the very bottom of that same stacked bar chart, look at male employment in agriculture.
Oh, wow.
It has basically vanished from the economic reality of the country. It hovers down there between 1% and 3%.
So practically nobody is farming.
Statistically speaking, across the macro population,
Right.
almost no one.
Okay, we need to pause here because we have to define our terms. What does a 97.1% service economy actually look like on the ground?
Right, because that word can mean a lot of things.
Exactly. When the average person hears service sector, they often picture retail. They think of baristas pulling espresso shots, restaurant servers, hotel clerks, retail associates. But let's be real, you do not generate 104,000 euro per capita GDP by having your citizens serve each other coffee and fold sweaters.
No, you certainly don't. That is a crucial distinction.
So what are they doing?
When macroeconomic analysts say services, in the specific context of Luxembourg, we are talking about extreme, top-tier hyper-financialization. We are talking about a landscape dominated by global private banking, massive institutional investment fund management, specialized corporate law, international insurance syndicates,
Wow.
and, of course, the vast, highly educated administrative apparatus required to regulate, audit, and support all of those industries.
It's white-collar hyperspecialization taken to its absolute logical extreme.
Exactly. You have to understand the historical context to appreciate this. Decades ago, Luxembourg was heavily reliant on the steel industry.
Really?
Oh, yes. They had blast furnaces. They had heavy soot-covered industrial manufacturing. But their leadership recognized a harsh geographical and demographic truth.
Which was?
They simply lacked the physical landmass and the sheer population size to compete in heavy manufacturing or agriculture on a modernized global scale against giants like Germany or the United States.
Makes sense.
So they deliberately pivoted. They engineered an invisible, incredibly robust infrastructure of corporate laws, highly advantageous tax frameworks, and impenetrable financial regulations that made their tiny geography the perfect, frictionless domicile for global capital.
Ah, I see.
That 97.1% figure doesn't represent retail workers. It represents a society entirely composed of high-level accountants, international lawyers, portfolio managers, and compliance officers.
Okay, but I have to push back here. I really do.
Go ahead.
Because if I'm looking at this slide deck, not just as an admirer of wealth, but as a city planner or a national security strategist, isn't that structural reality incredibly dangerous?
You're thinking about the lack of diversification.
Right. Exactly. If almost no one in your country is farming, you possess zero domestic food security. If practically no one is manufacturing, you have no domestic supply chain for basic goods. If 97% of your people are sitting at desks pushing paper and moving digital ones and zeros around, aren't you inherently terrifyingly vulnerable to global macroeconomic shocks?
That's a very fair point.
Like, what happens to this utopia if the global financial system freezes up like it did in 2008?
That is exactly the right question to ask, and it highlights the central paradox of hyperspecialization.
Right.
If we look at biology, an organism that evolves to perfectly adapt to one highly specific environmental niche is incredibly vulnerable if that environment suddenly shifts. The koala only eats eucalyptus. If the eucalyptus burns, the koala starves.
That's a great analogy.
But a national economy isn't a koala. Luxembourg has intentionally built massive systemic shock absorbers into its model. Well, regarding physical necessities like food and manufactured goods, they don't need to grow their own crops because their extreme wealth allows them to purchase absolute redundancy in global supply chains. They can outbid almost anyone for raw materials.
Okay, that covers the physical goods. What about the financial shocks?
because they act as a hub for global capital, not just domestic European capital. They are deeply mathematically diversified across every market on Earth. If the U.S. tech sector dips, they are simultaneously holding vast reserve of emerging Asian market assets or South American infrastructure funds.
Oh, wow.
Their exposure is so global that a localized crash doesn't wipe them out.
I see. So they aren't relying on one specific crop failing or succeeding. Their crop is the fundamental concept of money itself, flowing globally.
Exactly. They sit at the crossroads. And that concept of global flow leads us perfectly into the data you presented on slide 5, the hyper-openness of their economy.
Yes, slide 5. This specific chart is visually really striking. It's a low-saturation 2D area chart featuring a light gray fill. It tracks exports of goods and services as a percentage of GDP.
Hmm.
And the historical line starts way back at maybe 3 to 9%, modest, completely normal for a developing European state. But then the line just begins this relentless climb.
It really shoots up.
You put a horizontal dashed line directly at the 200% threshold on the vertical axis, and the data line doesn't just touch it, it breaks right through it, hitting an astonishing 217% and continuing upward.
Right.
The arrow you placed on the right points to this text. Total exports far exceed total GDP, reflecting extreme openness and status as a cross-border financial service trade hub.
What's truly fascinating here is the sheer mathematical defiance of that 217% number. Think about what that means. How can a country logically export more than 200% of its entire gross domestic product?
Right. That's exactly what I was struggling with. If GDP is, by definition, everything of value that you produce, how can you export twice as much as everything you produce? It feels like the fundamental math of the chart is broken.
It seems impossible until you understand the mechanics of a cross-border hub.
Yeah.
Let's step away from finance for a second and imagine a giant physical warehouse sitting in the middle of a major shipping route.
Okay. A warehouse.
Massive crates of goods are imported into this warehouse from country A. The workers inside the warehouse don't make the goods. They just briefly unpack them, reorganize them, maybe add some custom packaging or regulatory stamps, and then immediately export them out to country B.
Got it.
The total dollar value of the finished goods leaving the warehouse is absolutely massive. But the warehouse itself, its GDP, so to speak, only produced the relatively small value add of that repackaging service.
Oh, I see. The sheer volume of the stuff moving through the building is vastly larger than the economic activity generated by the building.
Precisely. Now take that physical warehouse and replace the wooden crates with financial capital.
Okay. Trillions upon trillions of euros flow into Luxembourg's banking sector and investment funds from all over the world. Luxembourg's massive service sector takes that money, manages it, restructures it into different fund vehicles, applies complex legal and tax frameworks to it, and then that exact same capital flows out to investments globally.
That is wild.
The sheer, overwhelming volume of the capital physically flowing through their digital system completely dwarfs the actual domestic economy of Luxembourg itself.
They are essentially a massive, highly efficient valve in the global plumbing of money.
A perfect analogy. And here's the genius of the model. Because they charge a tiny friction fee on every drop of water that passes through that valve in the form of corporate taxes, fund management fees, and legal billing, the wealth generated for the residents is staggering.
Yeah, bet.
Taking 0.1% of $1 trillion creates a lot of millionaires.
Okay, that clarifies the 217% mystery perfectly. But it's not just invisible money moving through fiber optic cables, right?
Yeah.
The deck shows they still physically manufacture some things. Slide 6 details this. Yes, the industrial upgrade. This shows that they didn't just abandon the physical world entirely.
The slide is a very simple 2D scatter plot. White background, solid dark blue dots without any shadowing or gradient. Pure, unadulterated data.
Very clean.
It tracks high-tech products specifically as a percentage of their total manufactured exports. And you've drawn this elegant oval circling the peak years on the scatter plot where that ratio hits over 50%. The annotation you provided reads, high-tech value-added industries occupy a key share of manufactured exports.
If we connect this specific data point to the bigger picture of the structural transformation we've been discussing, it reveals a very deliberate strategy.
Which is?
Luxembourg knew it couldn't compete on volume anymore. So for the physical goods they do continue to export, they aggressively move to the very highest pinnacle of the value chain. They aren't exporting raw, heavy steel anymore, even though, as we noted, steel was the historical lifeblood that built their early roads. Today, they're exporting highly complex, deeply specialized industrial components. They're exporting things with massive intellectual property value embedded directly into the physical object.
So whatever physical thing actually leaves their borders in a truck or a plane, it's packed with as much dense technical value as humanly possible.
Because logically, that is the only way a high-wage economy can manufacture anything and remain globally competitive.
Oh, that makes total sense.
Think about the labor costs. If your average worker is making 100,000 euros a year, you cannot pay them to assemble cheap plastic toys or basic textiles. You will be undercut by emerging markets instantly. Your workforce has to be assembling satellite communications arrays or precision medical equipment or specialized polymers.
Which obviously requires an incredibly smart, technically proficient, and healthy population to actually pull off. You can't just hand a wrench to someone and ask them to build a satellite.
No, you definitely cannot.
Which transitions us perfectly to part two of your slide deck. We've spent all this time establishing the engine of extreme wealth. We know how they make the money, but as anyone who studies development knows, having a massive pile of money and having a successful functioning society are absolutely not the same thing.
No, they are not.
There are plenty of places on Earth with massive GDPs, often driven by oil exports or raw natural resource extraction, where the actual citizens on the ground are struggling immensely.
Yes, the classic resource curse.
Yeah,
A highly concentrated stream of wealth that fails to distribute into human development.
exactly. But Luxembourg somehow avoided that trap. Let's look closely at how they deliberately translated that financial capital into actual human flourishing. Slide 8 is where the data starts looking at the actual human beings living inside this economic machine.
And the data here represents what I would call a modern health miracle.
It really is. On slide 8, you built this fascinating waterfall-style line chart. It tracks a very specific grim metric, the under 5 mortality rate per 1,000 live births. It starts back in the historical data at 37.2. You've circled that starting point with a solid line to draw the eye. And then there is this massive, heavy gray, downward-pointing arrow connecting it all the way to the endpoint of the chart, which is circled at a remarkable 2.3.
An incredible drop.
The text you included explains. Substantial mortality control brought about by the modern medical system. Also, the supplemental data here shows the lifetime risk of maternal death is virtually non-existent. It's a statistical zero.
This specific slide is where we have to separate dry economic theory from lived human reality.
Right.
A statistical drop from 37.2 down to 2.3 is not just an incremental improvement in public policy. It represents a fundamental paradigm-shifting reordering of the human experience within that country.
That's a powerful way to say it.
It means that the pervasive terror of losing a child to a preventable disease, a terror that was a baseline statistical reality for much of human history, has been virtually engineered out of existence.
But how do they actually do it? Because just throwing billions of euros at a hospital building doesn't automatically save lives. We've seen well-funded health systems in other developed nations fail to achieve these kinds of numbers.
Precisely. It's not just about the volume of funding, it's about the relentless pursuit of institutional competence.
Okay, unpack that.
Achieving a 2.3 mortality rate requires building a public healthcare infrastructure that physically and systematically reaches every single citizen, regardless of their geography, their income level, or their background. It means that high-quality prenatal care is absolutely ubiquitous and free.
Wow.
It means that pediatric emergency response times are measured in single-digit minutes. It requires a flawless supply chain for vaccines and modern therapeutics. That massive gray downward arrow on your slide doesn't just represent budget allocations. It represents thousands of specific individual lives saved through the relentless, iterative optimization of a public health system.
It's the ultimate human dividend of that 217% export ratio we talked about earlier. The global financial plumbing generates the capital, which physically buys the world-class medical infrastructure.
Yes.
And that exact same capital buys the education infrastructure, too, which brings us to slides 9 and 10. The education funnel.
This is the creation mechanism for the human capital required to keep the financial engine running.
Looking at slide 9, it's a deep gray and light gray 2D bar chart. Primary education enrollment is pinned between 96% and 99%. It is almost total societal saturation. And the retention rate, the amount of kids who stay in the system to grade 5, is 96.2%. You aligned the ends of the bars near the 100% mark with a vertical dashed line, and you added a text box without a shadow pointing directly to it that reads, Basic education achieves near universal lossless coverage. I
Lossless.
have to say, I love the use of the word lossless there. It reminds me of a high-quality audio file format.
Lossless is the perfect term for it, actually. In many developing economies, and even in some wealthy ones, you might see high initial primary enrollment numbers.
Yeah.
Everyone starts first grade.
Right.
But the dropout rate over the next 5 years is massive. Children leave the system because they have to work to support their families, or because the schools in rural areas fail them, or due to systemic inequalities.
That happens a lot, yeah.
Luxembourg's educational system operates like a perfectly sealed pipeline. Once a child enters that system, the state ensures they do not fall out through the cracks.
And where does that completely sealed pipeline ultimately lead? That's answered on slide 10.
The tertiary education data.
You used a minimalist 2D dumbbell plot for this data. I always appreciate dumbbell plots because they visually show the stretch or the leap over time so intuitively.
They're great for that, yeah.
It compares the percentage of men aged 25 and over who have completed at least short-cycle tertiary education. The left side of the dumbbell, the historical baseline, is sitting at 14.2%. The right side, representing the current data, is stretched all the way to 46.7%.
A huge jump.
You put a bold 46.7% right next to the dot and added a right-pointing arrow to emphasize just how rapid this expansion has been.
Let's unpack the terminology here so we're completely clear. When the data says short-cycle tertiary education, it is referring to practical, highly skilled post-secondary degrees that fall just short of a traditional 4-year bachelor's degree.
Oh, like associate degrees or certification.
Exactly. We're talking about advanced technical certifications, specialized IT diplomas, paralegal training, and high-level financial compliance certificates. Now, if we connect this specific data point to the bigger picture, think back to slide 4.
The one with the 97.1% service sector economy.
Exactly. You physically cannot run a hyper-financialized, high-tech export economy without a domestic population that is almost universally highly educated in these specific white-collar skills.
That makes sense.
You need a massive army of data analysts, multilingual client managers, database programmers, and regulatory compliance experts. The education system in Luxembourg isn't just viewed as a nice public good or a moral imperative. It is the absolute foundational prerequisite for their economic survival.
Wow.
They took their financial wealth and aggressively, systematically upgraded the cognitive hardware of their entire population to meet the demands of their own labor market.
Upgrading the hardware. Well, that brings up slide 12 perfectly because they didn't just upgrade the cognitive hardware, they upgraded the digital hardware too.
Right, the digital infrastructure.
This infographic is so stark and effective. It's a horizontal row of 10 human figures, and 9.9 of those figures are entirely filled in with a deep blue color.
Striking.
You boxed that last little sliver of white space on the 10th figure and wrote, "Digital infrastructure has reached almost saturation penetration." The data notes that male internet usage went from 45.3% historically to an astounding 99.3%. They also have hundreds of thousands of fixed broadband users in a tiny population.
It is, for all practical purposes, a completely digitized society. The friction of accessing information has been entirely removed.
You know, staring at this slide, it vividly reminds me of playing a city builder video game.
Oh, like SimCity.
Like SimCity or Cities, Skylines, exactly. When you start a new game, you're struggling. You're just trying to get basic water pipes connected to the residential zones without running out of money.
It's just scraping by.
But if you play the game long enough and you manage your economy perfectly, your treasury starts overflowing. And eventually, you stop agonizing over budgets and you just click the Upgrade All button on your city menus. You fully maximize every single tech tree available for your citizens. High-speed fiber optic internet for everyone. Click. Universal university access, click. Top-tier hospitals with 0 wait times, click.
That's a really fun way to look at it.
Looking at this slide deck, it honestly feels like Luxembourg basically beat the game.
They certainly achieved the win condition for that specific era of development. But here is where we have to step back and ask the truly critical question. Having near-perfect education, pristine health metrics, and total digital access, these are fantastic outputs. But sustaining a macro system that runs at this incredibly high specialized frequency requires an immense amount of structural stability.
Right.
A machine this complex, with this many interconnected financial and social gears, is inherently fragile. If one gear flips, the whole thing grinds to a halt. So, how does the system fundamentally protect itself from internal friction and societal breakdown?
Okay, let's unpack this structural defense mechanism. We are moving into part 3 of our analysis, the institutional bedrock. This is all about work, power, and trust. And we start this section with slide 11, focusing on the labor market.
A heavily fortified labor market.
The visual here is a flat 2D pie chart, or a donut chart rendered in simple gray and light blue. And the data shows that wage and salaried male workers absolutely dominate the labor force pie, making up between 80% to 92% of the entire working population. You drew a straight line pulling out this massive blue sector of the pie with the note. The labor market is highly formalized, and the risk of informal employment is extremely low, meaning that non-formal, highly vulnerable employment, things like unpaid family agricultural work or precarious app-based gig work, is basically non-existent.
This introduces a crucial economic concept: low labor vulnerability.
Let's define that.
To really understand this, we have to look outside of Luxembourg. In many parts of the world today, even in incredibly wealthy nations like the United States or the UK, a huge growing segment of the population lives in a state of chronic daily economic anxiety.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
They are independent contractors, they are day laborers, or they are forced into self-employment out of sheer desperation, not entrepreneurial choice. They have absolutely no safety net underneath them.
Right, one bad month, one illness, or a broken down car, and they can't pay their rent, the floor falls out from under them.
Exactly. It's an exhausting way to live. But in Luxembourg, participating in the economy predominantly means having a formal ironclad contract. It means having a predictable monthly salary, guaranteed paid time off, collective bargaining agreements through unions, and incredibly robust legal protections against arbitrary firing.
That's huge.
The deep, pervasive psychological security that this kind of formalization provides to a national population simply cannot be overstated. It is the invisible glue that creates absolute social cohesion.
How so?
People who feel deeply secure in their employment, who know they can provide for their families, do not riot in the streets. They do not embrace radical, systemic, burn-it-down populism at the same rates we see elsewhere. They fundamentally trust the system, because the system actively and visibly protects their livelihood.
So this simple blue pie chart isn't just showing us how people get their paychecks. It's actually a topographical map of social peace.
That is a brilliant way to phrase it, yes. And that long-term social peace is the absolute prerequisite necessary to execute massive, multi-decade national strategies. You cannot plan 50 years into the future if your government changes radically every 4 years due to economic unrest. Which brings us perfectly to the multi-decade strategy shown on slide 13.
Oh, this is a phenomenal chart, and I really want to spend some time on this because this touches on the environment quadrant of our initial matrix.
The energy transition.
Slide 13 tackles deep decarbonization. The visual is a 2D stacked area chart showing the entire historical evolution of their energy transition. You have 3 main areas flowing from left to right. Down at the bottom, anchored in dark gray, is coal generation. Above that, in a lighter gray, is natural gas. And finally, taking over the top in light blue, are renewable energy sources.
I want you to notice the specific trajectory of that dark gray coal area at the bottom.
It's incredible. The data shows coal starting way back at 47.1% of their total electricity generation. Nearly half of their power was coming from burning rocks. And as the timeline progresses to the right, that dark gray band just pinches out. It steadily narrows down year after year until it vanishes completely from the chart. You drew a specific hollow circle right at the absolute end of the coal timeline, exactly 0.0%.
Right.
The arrow points directly to it with the text. Coal completely exits the historical stage of power generation, achieving deep decarbonization.
Meanwhile, as coal dies, you see the light gray natural gas area spike massively to 76.2% as a transitional bridge fuel to keep the lights on, and then the light blue renewables begin an exponential curve outward, expanding massively to take over the load.
Right.
We are talking about hundreds of millions of kilowatt hours of clean energy.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. Hitting absolute zero on coal. Not 2%, not 1%. Zero. We talk about energy transitions on this show all the time, and usually it's a story of compromises. We reduced it by 40%.
Well, it's always partial.
But seeing a developed country actually pinch the coal line completely out of existence is a monumental administrative achievement. It requires immense, sustained political will to close those legacy plants, deal with the utility companies, and actively retrain the workers whose entire identities were tied to that industry.
It is a massive achievement, and the policy execution required to manage the grid stability while swapping out baseload power is incredibly complex. But In the spirit of analytical rigor, I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a moment.
Please do. We need to look at the whole picture.
It is significantly mathematically easier to hit absolute zero coal generation when your domestic economy is 97% white-collar services.
Ah, the structural pivot.
Yes. Remember our historical context. Luxembourg used to be an industrial powerhouse. The soot-covered steel industry was the very foundation of their early wealth, but they structurally offshored or transitioned entirely out of that heavy, immensely energy-intensive manufacturing.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
When your national energy grid is primarily responsible for powering highly efficient server farms, climate-controlled office buildings full of lawyers, and well-insulated residential homes, transitioning to a mix of renewables and natural gas is a highly manageable engineering problem.
Right.
If they still had 20 massive steel foundries operating 24 hours a day within their borders, requiring intense, sustained thermal heat, that dark gray coal line might not have hit zero nearly so quickly.
That is a really fair point, and it exposes a bit of a loophole in how we measure national emissions. They effectively exported their carbon-intensive industries to other countries, just like they imported their workforce.
Exactly.
So their domestic chart looks pristine. They get to draw that hollow circle at 0.0%. But the global carbon footprint of the heavy goods they still consume, the steel for their new office buildings, the cars they drive, is still out there in the atmosphere. It's just on China's or Germany's ledger now.
Exactly. It's a phenomenon known as carbon leakage.
Yeah.
However, even with that caveat, we absolutely shouldn't diminish the domestic policy achievement.
Definitely not.
The financial commitment required to build out the renewable infrastructure, to subsidize the solar panels, to manage the complex grid logistics of a natural gas bridge. It is still world-class governance. It requires a government bureaucracy that can calmly plan decades in advance and execute those plans without getting bogged down in low-level corruption or endless, paralyzing political gridlock.
Which brings us perfectly to what I think is the ultimate secret sauce of this entire system. Slide 14.
Yes, the global premium on governance. This is where the whole machine is anchored.
The visual here is a 2D radar chart. Sometimes these are called spider charts, where multiple metrics radiate out from a center point. It uses minimalist lines, just gray and blue, plotting out the World Bank governance indicators. Now, usually when you look at these radar charts for most countries, they look kind of jagged and uneven, like a squashed, lopsided star. Some metrics are good, some are terrible. But Luxembourg's chart is pushed almost all the way to the absolute outer edge on nearly every axis.
It's remarkably uniform.
You drew a solid, deliberate line circling the outermost nodes for two specific metrics: control of corruption and rule of law. They are permanently pinned at the 90% to 100% highest global percentiles. The annotation you wrote reads, "Extremely low institutional costs provide excellent credit endorsement for business and foreign investment."
This slide right here is the absolute linchpin of the entire Luxembourg model. Everything we discussed over the last 40 minutes, the 217% export ratio, the massive financial hubs, the trillions in cross-border capital flowing through their valve, none of it works, none of it exists without this specific radar chart.
Why? Just because investors won't park their money in a shady jurisdiction?
It's deeper than just being shady. Trust is the ultimate non-negotiable currency of a global financial hub. Let's walk through a scenario.
Okay, let's do it.
Imagine you are the CEO of a massive multinational corporation, Corp X, and you are looking to set up a European headquarters to route billions of dollars in investments. If you set up in a country with low rule of law, you face massive institutional costs.
Like what?
You might have to pay bribes to get building permits. Local courts might arbitrarily seize your assets if the political winds change. Contracts might be completely unenforceable if the local judge's brother-in-law is your competitor. The friction is endless.
That sounds like a nightmare.
But when Corp X looks at Luxembourg, they see absolute, unshakable certainty. They know the legal system is flawlessly fair, that contracts will be enforced to the letter, and that a local official is never, ever going to demand a bribe.
So achieving a 100% score in control of corruption isn't just a nice moral goal for their society. It is actually their core business product. They are monetizing their own integrity.
Exactly. That is a brilliant distillation. They are selling regulatory predictability. The low institutional cost mentioned in your annotation simply means that businesses don't have to waste time, lawyers, and money navigating Byzantine bureaucracy or greasing palms. The system functions exactly as it is written on the tin. That 90 to 100 percentile ranking is essentially a giant glowing neon sign visible to global capital, it says your money is mathematically and legally safe here.
So, to synthesize everything we've unpacked so far from this incredible deck, they used extreme economic openness to capture a massive, highly lucrative slice of global financial flows.
Yes.
They utilized the resulting astronomical wealth to build a pristine, highly educated, fiercely healthy society supported by a formal, incredibly secure labor market. And they actively maintain all of this stability through top-tier, corruption-free governance that keeps the golden goose laying eggs.
It is, by all traditional macroeconomic metrics, a flawlessly optimized society.
But
Yeah.
we have to talk about the Achilles heel. Let's transition into part 4 of our deep dive, Biology and the Future. Because the listener who brought us this painstakingly detailed slide deck didn't just want us to run a victory lap for Luxembourg, they brought us slide 7. And slide 7 vividly reveals the massive, creeping crack in the pristine armor.
The demographic time bomb.
Let me describe the visual of this slide. It's a flat, double-line chart utilizing deep gray and gray-blue tones. One line represents a metric called the old age dependency ratio. The other line tracks the percentage of the total population aged 65 and over.
And what does the trajectory of those lines look like?
It's stark. It is a relentless upward march. The old age dependency ratio steadily climbs from a historical baseline of 15.5% up to 22.5%. The 65 and over population breaks the 14.2% mark and keeps rising. And the specific visual detail you added here is chilling in its simplicity. You placed a thick, heavy gray upward-pointing arrow right at the exact moment where the curves start to bend upward more sharply. The text alongside it says, "The slope of aging becomes steeper, increasing the pressure on Social Security and labor force replenishment."
This raises an important question. Actually, let me correct that. It raises the most important question for any highly developed nation operating in the 21st century.
Wait.
Well, first, let's define the old age dependency ratio. It is a mathematical ratio comparing the number of elderly people, usually over 65, to the number of working age people, usually 15 to 64.
Okay.
It measures how many retirees each active worker has to financially support through their taxes. So the ultimate question is, how do you fundamentally fund a platinum tier welfare state and a world-class healthcare system when the ratio of active workers paying into the system versus the retirees aggressively drawing from the system shrinks every single year?
It's a brutal math problem that no amount of banking efficiency or legal predictability can solve. You can't regulate your way out of aging.
Because it's an unavoidable biological truth. It is the ultimate irony of their success. Luxembourg's incredible lossless healthcare system, the exact same system we praised earlier for driving child mortality down to 2.3 and limiting maternal death, also means its citizens are living much, much longer.
Oh, wow. I didn't think about that.
They are surviving into their 80s and 90s. And simultaneously, because they are a highly educated, wealthy, service-oriented society, their birth rates have naturally plummeted.
Right.
Which is the standard demographic pattern we see globally when women enter the workforce at a 97.1% rate and education levels spike.
Right. It makes total sense. If you spend 20 continuous years in the educational pipeline to get a master's degree so you can work in a high-pressure, high-tech financial compliance firm, you are highly likely to start a family much later in life. And you are statistically going to have fewer children when you do.
Exactly. So you end up with a ballooning population of long-lived retirees who expect and have been legally promised by that flawless governance system a very high standard of living, world-class medical care for complex, chronic, age-related conditions, and generous pensions.
And on the other side of the scale,
You have a shrinking base of native-born young workers available to tax to pay for it all.
which brings us inevitably to the final slide in the deck, slide 15, the policy collision.
This is the synthesis of the entire comprehensive assessment, the moment all the lines on the charts intersect.
Visually, it's a pure white text infographic, very clean. It features 3 vertical text blocks with subtle gray borders, perfectly summarizing the core points we just spent the last hour discussing. The extreme wealth generation through exports, the human welfare conversion through health and education, and the clean governance and decarbonization.
Right.
But then there is the 4th block. You highlighted this specific block with a bold, dark blue border to make it pop. It is the challenge module, and you drew a left-pointing arrow guiding the viewer's eye straight back to the aging data we just discussed.
And what does the dark blue box explicitly conclude?
It states the absolute mathematical necessity of continuously attracting high-quality, high-skilled immigrants to supplement the domestic labor force. It essentially concludes that mass immigration of highly educated workers is the only viable mathematical way to maintain the balance of the social security system and keep the economic engine running.
And there it is, the ultimate systemic vulnerability. Luxembourg's continued survival, the perpetuation of its utopian metrics, is entirely 100% dependent on remaining an attractive magnet for global talent.
They just need more people.
They simply cannot organically breed enough workers to sustain their massive financial machine, so they have no choice but to import them.
But wait, we talked about this at the very beginning. They already import hundreds of thousands of cross-border commuters every single morning.
Yes, but the commuters don't pay into the Social Security system in the same holistic way, and they don't solve the long-term demographic collapse of the resident population.
Oh, because they retire back in France or Germany.
Exactly. They will need more people to physically move there, establish residency, pay local property and income taxes, and fully integrate into the society. But this creates a profound existential cultural tension. How does a tiny, historically insular nation maintain its unique cultural identity, its specific linguistic heritage, and its tight-knit social cohesion when its very economic survival requires a constant massive influx of foreigners year after year?
That is an incredibly dangerous tightrope to walk. If they decide to close their borders to protect their culture, the brutal math of the aging population crushes their welfare state in a decade.
Yes.
The pensions dry up, the world-class healthcare system goes bankrupt because there aren't enough taxpayers to fund the hospitals.
Exactly. But if they open the borders too wide, too fast, without proper thoughtful integration mechanisms, they risk breaking the very social trust and low vulnerability cohesion we saw mapped out in the pie chart on slide 11.
Oh, wow.
If social cohesion breaks down, the political system becomes volatile. And if the political system becomes volatile, that pristine 100% governance radar chart warps.
And if the governance warps?
The global capital sleaze to a safer jurisdiction, and the entire 217% export engine seizes up.
Wow. It is a perfectly balanced house of cards made out of pure gold. So what does this all mean for you, the listener who took the time to bring us this brilliant, minimalist slide deck? Why should you care about the internal demographics of this tiny European nation?
It's a great question.
Well, whether you are studying macroeconomic trends for an investment firm, building a multinational business, or drafting public policy for your own local government, Luxembourg serves as the ultimate extreme case study. It proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that national wealth isn't just about having natural resources buried in the ground. It's about intentional structural design.
Absolutely.
It proves that extreme hyper-specialization and absolute institutional trust can create an engine of human flourishing that looks almost magical on paper.
But I think it also serves as a profound warning about the absolute limits of human engineering. Luxembourg has effectively solved the economic and institutional problems that plague 99% of the world. They conquered absolute poverty, they engineered child mortality out of existence, they eradicated coal from their grid, and they stamped out corruption. By having solved all the problems created by humans, their biggest existential threat isn't a market crash or a bad policy, it's just time. However, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over something not explicitly tracked in these gray and blue charts.
Lay it on us.
Luxembourg perfected the ultimate frictionless white-collar economy. 97.1% of their women and a huge portion of their men are engaged in high-level services, analyzing data, managing portfolios, ensuring legal compliance. But we are currently witnessing the rapid, unprecedented dawn of artificial intelligence and algorithmic financial management.
Oh my God.
What happens to a nation when its entire survival relies on a workforce specializing in the exact administrative and cognitive tasks that a supercomputer can now execute flawlessly in 3 seconds? They spent 50 years engineering themselves to be perfectly adapted to the digital age. Have they just engineered themselves into an entirely new, invisible kind of vulnerability?
That is a terrifyingly brilliant question. It makes you look at that perfect diagnostic X-ray we talked about at the beginning in a whole new way.
It really does.
The bones of the country are strong. The system is engineered to absolute perfection. But the X-ray can't tell you how to stop the patient from aging, and it certainly can't tell you what happens when the hospital itself gets automated. It's a beautifully clear picture of an unsolvable biological truth colliding with an unpredictable technological future. Thank you so much for bringing us this incredible deep dive. It's given us an immense amount to think about.